Welcome back to the Banderpod, the writerly and readerly podcast of Bandersnatch Books. We are a small press publisher of treasures found off the beaten path for lovers of all that is good, true, and beautiful. I'm Annie Beth Donahue, and today I am talking with Rachel Donahue about margin, decluttering to create space. Rachel, welcome to the interviewee side of the Banderpod.
Thank you. This is fun.
All right, so Rachel, before you started your most recent season of writing, you kicked it off with a season of decluttering.
Yes.
So since this is a writing podcast, I wanted to talk about how did that decluttering impact your ability to start writing again?
Yeah. So the writing came as a surprise kind of after that season of decluttering. I wasn't looking for that. It was kind of just me on my face before God asking, what do you have for us in this new season? And the writing came out of that. But looking back, I realized that I wouldn't have had the space to pursue the writing if I hadn't created margin in the months leading up to that. To give a little more context for people who don't know our story, Mick and I had lived overseas. We did missions work cross-culturally for the first dozen years of our marriage and had moved frequently in the middle of all of that, back and forth across the pond, traveling a lot in the US. And when you have to live out of a suitcase so much, you naturally have these patterns of decluttering and minimizing to only keep what's important because you can't always have everything with you. And so we had just kind of lived that for the first dozen years of our marriage. So we had just come off the field after a season of burnout, a time of recovery, and we had resigned from our work overseas and had kind of established ourselves in the US, moved into a new house. And for the first time in our marriage, I think since like the third year we were married when we moved overseas, we had all of our belongings in one place. And so anything that we owned duplicates of, we had to get rid of. So our daughter Evelyn had been born. This would have been late summer 2016. And then my season of writing started in January of 2017. So this is that, 4 or 5 month window in between. I really got onto this decluttering kick, and I was following one of the minimalist mama gurus, and she had lots of blog posts and videos about how to go through the process of decluttering. We're decluttering books and toys and clothes and kitchen gadgets, like things that we didn't even realize we owned multiple of, but just kind of clearing all these things out of the house and then rethinking how we did Christmas and birthdays and realizing our kids have so much stuff. The idea of gifting experience gifts for Christmas instead of lots of toys and trinkets and things. That kind of reevaluating how, like, now we have everything in one place. Let's kind of minimize and let's set up this new house in a way that's healthy from the beginning. And now that we've lived here for a long time, I'm really glad we did, because it's amazing how quickly you can accumulate stuff. So yeah, that's kind of the background to it.
Yeah, that's so true. Living in one place for an extended period of time does contribute to the collection of things, right? And so one of my questions was going to be, do you think living internationally helped decluttering become a way of life, which you kind of already answered there?
Yeah. And I will say for us, I mean, we were living in Europe and there's not a lot of space. Like our master bedroom in Europe was about the same square footage as our closet here. And I'm not kidding. I mean, it was just enough room for the bed, and you could walk kind of sideways around the edges of the bed, and that's it.
Did you even have a washer and dryer, or did you have to go to the laundromat?
We did have a washer and dryer. They were very small.
And in your kitchen, probably.
And they were in the kitchen. And there was no room. And they were kind of like, we had like this tiny little patio area. I hate to even use the word patio. Imagine a small closet, like a hall closet, but outside. And so we had access to a clothesline that, all of the neighbors in the apartments above us had access. It's kind of an outdoor space. So if somebody from the 5th floor drops something, it ends on our patio. because we were on the bottom level of the building. So we actually got to know some of our neighbors from upstairs that way. They'd come down and get socks or, whatever. But yeah, there wasn't a lot of room. We did have a dryer, thankfully, with young children. It helped us to do laundry a little more quickly, but there was no room. Like it would just pile up and it would take over the kitchen. And so, yeah, you adapt your living behaviors to accommodate the small space that you're in. We picked up a lot of tricks of organization and just learning what we needed, what we didn't need, and how to make use of the space in a way that kept things from just piling up in the middle of the room.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, even if you don't live internationally in a smaller apartment, just traveling in general, you've got to have those strategies for packing strategically, right?
Yep.
And only taking the things that you need.
Yes. That's
so
exactly
that
right.
definitely impacted probably your skills, at least your skills at decluttering.
Exactly. Yeah. You kind of hone those skills and you just kind of get good at, you get an eye for what fits where, and yeah, you can do it quickly.
Yeah. There are a lot of serious things I'm going to ask you about this topic in a little bit, but before we do that, I do want to see if you have any practical tips for other people who may be, wanting to declutter and experience that freedom, but they haven't quite gotten there yet. Like, for example, I love decluttering and actually am a very organized person by myself.
Yes.
But you can't tell that from my house because the majority of my family has ADHD.
Right.
And we have just not yet hit on a system that works for everyone.
Yes. And that is a
so
challenge.
How have you done that?
So part of it is that my husband and I are both people who do not enjoy cluttered spaces. And also, we can live with a certain amount of clutter. So my house is not immaculate. It is not. We house clean by scurry funging. That's a new word for the day.
Nice.
We discovered this word a few years ago. To scurry funge is to clean rapidly at the last minute because someone is imminently arriving at your house. It's that last minute, 10 minutes of just blitzing the house to get it ready for company. And so we try to keep our house at a level where we can scurry funge and in less than 30 minutes have the house presentable for company. And we have a family of 6. And so when we scurry funge, it's all hands on deck, all the way down to little Evelyn, who is now 7 years old. Everybody is picking up their shoes, putting them away, picking up their own things, taking them to their room, that kind of thing. And so we have just developed these rhythms. And granted, right now we're in a season, we're working in the garden every morning and evening. There's a huge pile of shoes at the back door, lots of mud being tracked in, vegetables on the counter, and a huge Lego table because it's the summer and the kids are, they have their toys everywhere. It's a bit of a different season, but normally our baseline, we try to kind of maintain a level where we can get things in order in a relatively small amount of time. And also another idea that I learned years ago, if you are familiar with Clay and Sally Clarkson, I had read Sally's books, The Ministry of Motherhood and The Mission of Motherhood. And in one of those books, she says that Clay helped her understand that household management is basically a stress reduction system. That mindset helped me realize, okay, my house doesn't have to be perfect all the time. I can give my family grace to live in the space that we live in. But when everybody starts to feel stressed out, and then I realize, okay, the laundry is out of control or the toys have taken over and there's no peaceful place to exist in our house. Like there's nowhere to go where you're not overwhelmed with stuff. Part of it has just been being in tune with what stresses our family out. For Mick, it's clutter, like visual clutter. So just taking things and moving them to the walls or, putting them into the cabinets or whatever where they go. It doesn't have to be perfect, but if you can reduce the visual clutter in the middle of the room, it helps bring that stress level down and feel like we can function. We can mentally process in this space without being overwhelmed with what's around us. And that's different for every person. I think just being in tune with knowing what stresses you out and what you need as a bare minimum. There are people who need immaculate spaces in order to function, but they have adapted. So they have the ability to maintain that. and they know that they thrive when they're in that space. For our family, if you had to have a space immaculate all the time, it would stress us out because we live with a certain amount of, dirt piling up at the back door because our son has been working at the horse barn, or Lego toys scattered all over the table. And then here's another table with a puzzle spread out, just learning what you need in order to thrive and then trying to work to maintain that.
Yeah, so that's a really good point that ties into the heart of what we want to talk about here, is that when we're talking about decluttering to make space for your creative endeavors, what you are doing is you're reducing your stress levels. You're reducing the, like if you think Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like,
right.
You're taking care of some of those more base needs.
Yeah.
So that your body can, was it your parasympathetic nervous system, I believe, is the one that's the rest and digest, can actually bring things down so that you are able to then tap into the creative part of your brain. Because if you're in fight or flight mode where you're feeling stressed, something is a threat to you or doesn't feel safe, like your environment doesn't feel safe because it's cluttered, or it's, reminding you of all the things that you should be doing instead of writing or reading, then you cannot tap into the creative part of your brain.
Yeah.
So that's a really important point, that's going to be different for everyone. And for some people, being too clean and too organized would actually be more stressful.
Right.
Because it's creating more stress to try to maintain a certain level.
Yes.
Whereas for other people, maybe they have to be at that level.
Right.
So,
and I would say being a part of a family is a challenge because you can have opposite personalities within the same family.
Yes.
I have two boys who are almost complete opposites in their needs, as far as like their sensory needs and their emotional needs. It's like oil and water. And so you can, like, if you live in an environment like that, then creating a single space that is your space. So for my husband and I, our room is off limits to the kids. That is our space. And so we keep it the level that we need. So even if all of our shared spaces with our children, if they start to creep out of control, we at least have a retreat in our room. We have a big chair in there that's big enough for both of us to sit in, and we have a place to escape to kind of do creative work or to just process some things and then attack the clutter and the mess, once we've recharged a bit. So it doesn't have to be a very large space. It can be, I've seen people who have turned closets into writing desks, where they build shelves into the closet with a desk there. And then basically they can enter this tiny little space that is perfectly clean, and it just kind of blocks out everything else. And there are lots of creative ways to find that space if you are not able to be in control of your whole environment.
Yes. So I do follow a lot of organization gurus, I guess, on the socials. And that's usually one of their first tips is when you just get started, or like you said, even if you're not just getting started, but you have a household where you can't be in control of everything, to have that one space that you can control, whether it's your bedroom or a desk area or an office or something, and start there. And then, hopefully it can spread to the rest of the house. But
right. Ideally,
you have a space where you can reset yourself at least.
Right. And I think seasonally, we recognize that our family has rhythms. There is a busy time of the year. During busy season, we're not decluttering. We're just kind of maintaining and surviving. And then, the summer comes and we have a lot more margin. And so we use the summer to declutter, to, flip out the wardrobes, to pare down the amount of toys or stuff that is piled up in the kids' rooms. And that, knowing that there is a season for that. It doesn't have to be today. I can actually give myself permission today to be okay with the mess, because I know next month school will be done and summer will be here and we will attack the mess then. Like, we just have a few more weeks to get through. And so that has been helpful, of not stressing about it today, because I know I have a time set aside to work on that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That if you have time on your calendar that you see is going to open up, that can at least alleviate some of the stress of looking around and thinking, oh no, this is never going to get done. If you know that, well, it's not going to get done today, but it will get done because I have a plan for it later.
Yes.
And that works. Like you just said, literal seasons, busy season versus summer, versus, holidays get kind of full, and also seasons of life. So if you just had a baby, or
right,
like you just said, if you're working a lot in the season, it can be tough, and you have to have grace for that.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, there are days that I give myself grace to let the laundry pile up. And honestly, like with the time blocking, I have found that the most efficient way to do laundry for our family is not to do a load every day, but to let it pile up. Then I bring it all together in the laundry room at one time. I sort it into baskets based on colors and whites and darks. And then I wash one load after another. And I basically just spend that day focused on laundry. I'll catch up on podcasts or, whatever, because my hands are busy. But I'm just kind of cycling everything through, getting it caught up. The laundry is never finished, but kind of catching up to where we are that day and then letting it pile up again. And for us, that rhythm works really well until the child comes and says, "Oh, the shirt for tomorrow and it's not clean." And then, we're throwing together a load of laundry that night.
Hey, it's just like time blocking at work. We do that at work,
yeah.
where we time block for certain types of activities, because it's true that you lose traction, you lose focus when you transition from one thing to the next. So if you're, some people will say, well, just clean here for 15 minutes or whatever, and then go on to something else. That's not a bad idea. If 15 minutes is all you've got, you're putting out a hot spot, clearing off a counter or something like that. But sometimes it really does need focused time where you, like you said, today is laundry day. There's a song about that, right? Like,
yep.
Today is Monday. Today is Monday.
That's right.
What are we doing
Monday wash day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. So that is great. And also, I did want to just kind of go back to what you said about how decluttering, not just to create, but to be hospitable. Because if you have your house at a baseline where you can do that 30-minute, what do you call it? Scurry
funge.
Scurry funge. Okay.
Scurry funge. Word of the day.
Scurry funge. Ding. If you can do that, then you have the ability to be more hospitable than if your house is in such bad shape that you just really can't, invite people over.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to like our early days in ministry. Somebody told us that ministry happens in the margins. And so if you have no margin, it's hard to make space to meet other people's needs. So we have tried, and especially after going through that season of burnout, when we weren't sleeping at night, we had a baby who was extremely colicky. We were dealing with many levels of stress through work and other family needs, and we didn't slow down. Our schedule was full all the time, and we had no margin for rest. We had we just kept pouring out and pouring out, even though we were empty. So after going through that experience, we have been much more intentional about keeping margin, not only for our own health, but for healthy ministry to happen as well. We try to keep margin in our house, yes, so that we can host at a moment's notice. Like last year, the beginning of last summer, hosted someone in our home who had their paperwork had been approved suddenly, and they needed a place to stay upon arrival in the United States. And we were able to open our home at a last minute's notice for a week, a little over a week, and host this person because we had created that kind of margin. And like that whole philosophy, like I think it's just kind of been built into the posture of the way we live and work and do ministry to try to maintain that kind of space.
That's actually a good point. And I want to follow up on that kind of quickly, because I've actually been asked about this myself. Oh, you don't have any time to do XYZ thing. But that's because all of my margin is filled with ministry, if that makes sense. So
right.
And then I still end up with no margin because the margin I did have is now filled with serving or doing this, that, or the other. So, okay, so there's creating margin so that you have the margin to serve others.
Right.
What about margin that's truly like a Sabbath margin, or, a sabbatical type margin, like where you're maybe not freeing up margin to do something else, to create or to serve.
Right.
You're creating margin just to create margin.
Yeah. So having margin for Sabbath, for rest. And when I say rest, one of the things when we were going through counseling after burnout, the counselor helped us understand that rest doesn't mean sitting and scrolling on your phone or watching a movie. Those are not rest. Your body might be in a posture of rest, but your mind is not at rest. Your mind is still cluttered with ideas. Creating margin for rest really is about more than just creating space. It's about creating quiet. We have had rhythms of quiet. And when you're in full-time ministry, that can't happen on a Sunday. It has to be a different day of the week. And so there are a lot of pastors that we know who will take Monday as their Sabbath day because they spend the rest of the week preparing for a sermon, for ministry. And then Sunday is a very full day. And so they take Monday off as their day of rest. Just creating for us right now, that's usually a Saturday. Like we try not to book too many things. I mean, sometimes Saturday is the only day that people can meet or do things. But for the most part, we try not to book our Saturdays because we want a little bit of extra margin for just being present with our kids, for resting. And we try not to fill that with screen time or, we try to be outside. We try to be in a posture of rest, not just physically, but mentally as well, and give our brains room to process. And that then feeds those creative things. Sometimes it's out pulling weeds in the garden, having that space where your hands are busy, but your mind is free and there's no noise. There's nothing. I'm not listening to a podcast. I'm not engaged in anything. I'm just letting my brain and my body be present where I am and process. And that creates margin for creativity as well.
Yeah, I love that. I love that your hands are busy, but your mind is free. There are tasks that we can do like that, allow our minds to wander and think and really rest, even though you're not physically, like, say, asleep, right?
Right.
Just taking a nap. Okay.
Yes.
That's not necessarily, it could be rest, but
sometimes you need a nap. Like a nap is a holy thing, especially if you're a mom with very young children. The holiest thing you can do is to ignore the laundry and sleep while the baby is sleeping because it refreshes you and it refreshes your energy and your capacity to be able to care for the people around you.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So I probably know the answer to this question, but I can also think of the opposite answer as well. So I'm going to ask you, when do poetic ideas strike you most often? During busy times or during margin times? And the reason I ask it this way is because there are times that I get struck with ideas when I'm super busy and you're like scribbling things on a note, like trying to stick it somewhere so that you can come back to it later, right? So
yes.
For you, do the ideas strike when you're busy and then like in the margin, you actually have time to flesh them out? Or do you find that you need the margin to even think of them in the first place?
Often, I'd say it comes a lot more in the margin. I mean, I do get ideas sometimes when we're in the middle of something busy and I'm, like hammering out an idea in a note app on my phone, kind of in the middle of as we're going. But most often it's in those quiet spaces. Like the other day I was working in the garden and I don't know what it is about gardening and pulling weeds, but it makes the words come. Like my mind is finally able to process things I'm experiencing into words. And then I have to just stop what I'm doing and take the time to write it down and type it out. But those margin times aren't where I'm sitting down and now I'm going to write. Mick and I actually call the shower our idea box because we both, like, we don't have any kind of like speakers or anything. Neither one of us are listening to anything in the shower. So when you're in the shower, it's just, you do the same routine every day. Every time you take a shower, it's the same routine. You don't have to think about which shampoo I'm going to use, or it's the same thing. And so because your body is going through the motions that you already know, it's routine, your brain has an opportunity to just kind of process things. And we both come up with some of the best ideas. And, or you finally like come to a solution to a problem you were puzzling over, or I had an idea for a poem, but I finally have my first line or something like that. It's in those margin spaces that usually the words I might have ideas other times, but it's in the margin where I'm actually able to flesh that out a little bit. And sometimes it is sitting down and purposefully working through, but not always.
Yeah, that makes sense. You can do your composition in the margins.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so we talked a lot about decluttering, especially like our spaces visually so that it frees up or it decreases our stress level.
Mm-hmm.
But besides decluttering stuff, what are some other things in our lives that we need to declutter?
Our inboxes. It could be like our schedule. When I first went through this process of decluttering, one of the gurus that I was listening to said that everything you touch is going to consume some of your time. So she used the toaster as an example. How often do you use your toaster? Do you use it every day? You have to clean the toaster or around the toaster. When you're wiping down the counters, you have to move it. Is it worth moving it, cleaning around it? Like, do you use it often enough? If you do, great, leave it there. If you never use your toaster, why do you have a toaster? You know, I mean, it's just one of those things that it's a really simple, silly thing. But then taking that out to even like the emails that are coming into my inbox, that I follow a whole bunch of people on Substack. And I was thinking this week, I need to pare down even the things that are coming into my inbox on Substack. There are people's Substacks that I read everything they write. There are other things that, wow, that was really good, but I have so like people are writing them faster than I can read them. Yeah, anything like that. And even with our schedule, with 4 kids, it would be really easy for us to just be consumed with this one and that sport and this one and that hobby and just be running and going all the time. But we know what level of stress that would cause for our family. Our family doesn't do transitions well, especially going out of the house. There's a great deal of anxiety into social situations. And so we have made deliberate choices of, you know, we're going to pick one thing or maybe only one thing at a time, or trying to minimize, can we put music lessons back to back for 2 of our kids, and then we're only making 1 trip out of the house, trying to keep our schedule decluttered so that we're not in a frenzy, because we know what that does to our family.
Yeah, that's good. Decluttering your schedule and consolidating things like you were talking about, that can be really helpful. It's about reducing the stress and allowing you to think about other things.
Yeah. And decision making is one thing that causes a lot of stress. It's the reason that when you come back to the US from overseas, you stand in the middle of the cereal aisle completely overwhelmed because there are so many options and so many possibilities, and you can't make a decision. I just want the one basic simple thing, and I can't find it.
I heard somebody say one time that living in the United States versus say living in a lot of other countries is like eating at a regular restaurant versus going to the Cheesecake Factory. So the US is the Cheesecake Factory. If you couldn't figure that one out,
Right.
We've got like the menu that's about 32 pages long.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, so many options, and you just get decision fatigue.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Any way that in our daily routine I can cut out having to make decisions or having to put extra creative thought toward this process or this thing, then I'm looking to do it. I think our food plan would be much more basic if it were up to me every day, because I don't enjoy food prep the way Mick does, but he enjoys the creative outlet. So he's always, you know, looking at recipes and things like that, looking for ways he can be creative and do something new. And I'd be happy to just not think about it. And, you know, we'll just do a take on pasta and we'll just change the way we make pasta every week. But, you know, that's where we work together and kind of balance each other on that.
Yeah. Well, Rachel, I actually have a few popcorn questions for you.
Okay.
First question. What's your favorite cleaning hack?
Yeah, I mean, scurry funging, I mean, definitely is one of my hacks. I love it.
All right, second question. What's your favorite type of tea?
I love a good PG Tips. I mean, it's kind of my go-to. English breakfast. There was a chai masala tea that you gave me, I think.
Oh yeah, that was a good one.
Christmas. I love it. It takes a little longer to make it because I have to heat up the milk to go with it, but it's so good. Yeah, it's just a good solid black tea.
I agree with you. Black tea is my favorite. And final popcorn question. What are you reading right now?
Oh, right now, I am in the middle of a book by Jasper Ford called The Eyre Affair, like Eyre, like Jane Eyre.
I love that series. One of my favorites.
So I'm in the middle of the first book of that. I am about to start a Bible study book on the book of Hosea. And I have written the first draft of a novel that is based on the story of Hosea and Gomer. So I'm excited to do this summer study to kind of go a little deeper in that book.
All right. Well, thank you, Rachel.
All right. Well, I really enjoyed having this conversation. I hope it's really helpful to people who are pursuing creative things and looking for practical ways to make more space for creativity.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you for listening, and may you find bookish treasures in your wanderings off the beaten path. Thanks for listening in to our conversation today on the Banderpod. We hope you'll check out our full catalog at bandersnatchbooks.com. The Banderpod is produced by Rachel S. Donahue, A.B. Donahue, and Carolyn Claire Gibbons. Audio engineering by S.D.G. Morgan. Artwork by Evelyn Warnamundi. Many thanks to our friend Chris Slayton of Son of Laughter for our theme song, Cricket in a Jar. Find links and more in the show notes.